bad because like the privacy doesn't concern me because I can just set up like a network for itself, but I have to get one.
So I mean, we might technically be live right now. Welcome to Partyline Chat. This is a simulcasted event on Twitter, Periscope, and YouTube. First time Partyline Chat simulcasting. This is going to be a nice kind of head-to-head kind of discussion between Chris DeRose and Jal. You know him from the Nash folks, but we've got a bunch of other people on today as well. My name is Michael Finney. Do the rest of the people want to introduce themselves so we can all see each other?
I'm Brian. I got the paper bag head on Twitter. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, Brian. Okay, so I know paper bag head. I didn't know Brian. Chris DeRose, what's up, party people? It's been a while since I've been on a mic, and it feels good. Feels good, man. Glad to be here.
Yeah, Jal. Most people know me for promoting Ideal Money, and kind of stoked to be here to get some good discussion going.
Jal, good to see you.
You too.
UIT Cal, I'm sort of just here, so there we go.
Hey, Tim here. Just chilling around.
Yep.
Yeah, very good. So, you know, as we say here, we're in the entertainment business. This is also going to be up on Shaw Wars, if you're familiar with that, which is proof of work voting prediction market. So these two guys, if you see the animation there, that is from Shaw Wars. So they are going to be allowing you to vote for your favorite guest today, and then we'll find out who wins. Obviously, you know, you can input your liquidity, as they say. So, starting off...
Do you know the Shaw Wars website? Is it shawwars.io?
It's shawwars.com. That's SHAWARS.com. Com is spelled COM. So that's where you want to go to get involved with the Shaw Wars piece. Obviously, you know, it behooves you to vote for yourself, I suppose. Which is why I gave you guys the heads up about that, because I thought you might be interested.
Nice.
To kind of get things rolling, you guys know each other. Jal constantly harasses you, Chris, on Twitter. We see it.
He doesn't harass me. I like Jal. I like him a lot, actually.
I like Jal too, obviously. We've known each other, I don't know, I guess probably close to 2 years, running around on Twitter as he gets banned off and then starts a new account.
What get banned for?
Yeah, well, different things, I think. Jal, do you want to talk to that point?
Well, someone asked what me and DeRose disagree on, and I don't know if I could just come up with something. I think maybe we could get into some talking points, and we might find that out if there is something.
I can suggest that.
What are you getting banned
appreciate.
for? Jal.
What are you getting banned for?
I don't know.
Okay.
Have you ever been the victim of mass reporting?
Possibly. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Okay, DeRose, what were you going to say there?
I could suggest that we have been looking for ideals in society as a general rule the last 10 years. And one by one, it seems like every ideal gets eviscerated in front of the mob. And we're less of a crowd in search of an ideal at this point than we are a crowd in search of a solution. And it would seem that there's a disconnect between those two goals. So while we may find ideal money, my concern would be that it wouldn't solve any problem. That would be a disconnect.
What does ideal mean to you when you use it in that context?
Well, and that would be, again, I'm glad you asked that. I can suggest a bunch of answers. Perfection, perhaps, or equity, or efficiency. Like all of these are valid answers. I don't necessarily have any one of those because I think my point would be that in any answer, it seems that the market has suggested online, the evisceration of that value would commence thereafter. So it's becoming a more. It's like I mean, this gets into the politics, but it's very hard to talk our way into solutions at this point. And I suspect there's going to be a lot less carrots and a lot more sticks in our future.
I think we will sort of inevitably get into politics. And the other sort of talking point that we might as well throw out there is like, how's it going in the United States right now? And wasn't there some sort of a predictable thing going on where you could see, you've got these people in the streets protesting and counter-protesting, and that seems to be, the energy is increasing. And I think you sort of knew that was coming.
I think all Bitcoiners knew that it was coming, and shame on us for not having been prepared. But yeah, that's the case. It's an exciting time, actually. I kind of like it, but it's weird. It's real damn weird, and probably not an uptick anytime soon.
One thing that was weird about it, like this Andrew Yang was going around talking about his platform was universal basic income. And then all of a sudden, it's like that's ripped away from him because I'm in Canada, our government just threw money at us too. And that's sort of relevant, I think. Yeah,
that got weird. I actually loved Andrew Yang's presentation. When I think of like the habitus of like the ideal candidate to me, Andrew Yang would probably be it. He's young enough to where he's not a moron, and he's old enough to where he's not a moron, which is unlike some of the other candidates out there. And he isn't. I don't know. He just seemed more relatable, and he seemed like he could have a conversation with a wide swath of people, rather than being like a robot. But that being said, I'm not particularly amenable to UBI. I just think that's looting the treasury by another name. And I have no doubt we have that in our future. I just doubt that the country is really going to survive that. So I would expect that kind of plan would just balkanize the country into like communists and non-communists, I guess. So I wasn't really a big fan of Andrew Yang. But fast forward, not even 6 months maybe, we ended up prototyping universal basic income under the conservative platform through this sort of pandemic thing we're doing with free money for everybody to some degree. So maybe it's very limited. Maybe that doesn't constitute UBI. But again, it got weird. The pattern seems to be that like we find some tenant, then we eviscerate it. Like there's almost like something that has reverence or something that has meaning. Some plan could come to fruition, and then the mob just disintegrates it, and then it's kind of weird because it's not like a conclusion; it just kind of disappeared. I feel like that's the theme on a lot of this stuff.
Is COVID the tenant here? Is that
even correct? That's got? I mean, these hysterias. A lot of this started with like the feminism stuff in my world, and you have this hysteria. It's like it's a very predictable pattern. You have a hysteria. Somebody finds something of meaning. People then object to identifying the meaning, and they sort of come up with these fits of convulsions of like, I don't know, disgust oftentimes. And then inevitably the thing gets inspected, at which time it disappears, and then we like don't talk about it anymore. So like we had that with feminism. We're going to have it with racism. I could see that coming. We've had it with a few things have popped out. I'm trying to remember. I should make a list of them. I think the corona is going to be another one where it's going to be like the end of the world, and then in a year we're all just like not talking about it. So yeah, what's it? There was another one that I've totally everyone. I know the thing is we all forget about them. That shows how like specious half these things are.
What are you talking about? Like the movements, like Gamergate.
Yeah, I mean they're really hysterias and mass panics.
Yeah, Gamergate, Comicsgate, Hollywood. Doing the Get Woke Go Broke phenomenon, which is true. Yes.
Gamergate and feminism were kind of the thing. So like they're often like foundational like cultural values.
You have the same thing in young adult fiction, but there was just no outrage against it in the young adult fiction industry. Like, yeah, that feminism like kind of led the way for all the other SJW stuff in all the academics and industries that are now getting woke and going broke, I think.
Agreed. Well, it's a property of the medium, of the online medium, I think. A combination of like guess, demographic considerations, advertising considerations, and just general naiveness.
I think they
I'm not
confuse
above it.
advertising and create these jobs that have no connection to revenue. So you have this huge ass, these huge salaries kind of like set aside for positions like, diversity, inclusion, like the people can be CEOs of that, and then you have, various marketing kind of jobs where in these social media companies that because of the fleecing of advertisers, because none of these numbers are accurate, they can afford these jobs. Whereas, if you got to move concrete from one point A to point B and that's your job, you don't have time for, this nonsense.
Agreed. There's a lot of that in some of this might be economic. I mean, you have these like major tidal forces at work. It seems to me. You're absolutely right. You have
remember when
Asians.
Tech used to be something that old ugly men went and got some kind of sickness from, right? Because if you were working close to like the metal and stuff, you got sick, and you were balding and you were ugly.
Yes.
And it was a socially disturbing line of work. Like you just looked like garbage all the time. And there's like memes of this. And then they got free coffee, and then they got all the VC money came in. Everyone's getting like massages at work, and you have like the ball pit, and you have the Lego room, and you have the bean bags. Next thing you know, you got diversity inclusion CEOs and all sorts of crazy religious nonsense going on.
I remember another one. Terrorism was another hysteria.
That's right.
For
That's
sure.
right.
Sure.
And that might be the first one, but you'll notice that like
there's satanic panic.
Yeah. I mean, these things are clearly precedented even throughout history. It's mostly a matter of like the amplitude and the period between them the amplitude's been going up and the period's been going down. So you're having more frequent
on that.
Red Scare.
100%. That was another one. Y2K for sure.
At least
that one was a real interesting. That was a tech one too. It should be said that one is probably even like prescient in that way. Yeah, Y2K was weird. If you didn't live through that, you wouldn't even believe it. But that was probably the first one that I really experienced.
We certainly don't talk about that one very much anymore.
Yeah, we forget about it.
Hear about it. Yeah.
I know a guy who, like, when he introduces himself in like meetings and things, he actually references that he worked on Y2K at like IBM. It's like,
okay, at IBM, perfect. Like that's a perfect association for that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Office Space is entirely about the banality of the workplace caused by reacting to these type of panics.
Office Space in the sense
the
that
movie, because it was about a corporation that grew to a gigantic, unsustainable state, all due to the Y2K panic, and how that everybody there working at this company is just doing whatever they have to survive and do the least amount of work as possible. And everybody's job is pointless,
Remember that movie.
They're getting paid tons of money because it's this big panic scare.
You know what also is kind of sticks out to me when I think of the contrast between like that movie and like the culture of the times? There was still a separation, I think, of the up and coming versus the incumbents. So like when I see that sort of that movie, what I think of is like the young generation is going to fix that maybe. And this is like a culture clash between the woke young people of that time. But now we're older, and now we're like the old guys maybe in that movie, or getting to be.
It's
I don't
crazy.
know that we've really acclimated.
It's crazy when you think about like, because like I was of age where we were going to Iraq, and most of the people my age were like watching the Daily Show with Jon Stewart, and totally quote unquote going to change everything. And now those people all watch MSNBC, and they root for the very people that they hated under the Bush regime.
Yeah,
they root for them. They root for Nicole Wallace, who was Bush's spokesperson, I believe. They root for William Mueller, who lied to Congress about weapons of mass destruction. And it's interesting to see that, like, that it makes you wonder what's going to happen with all these kids. Because right now, I think one of the current panics we're looking at is the media establishment panicking about the new media, which is like YouTube and BitChute and Periscope and all that stuff. And it makes you wonder what happens when people like that are these new media figures end up replacing, you know, the guard that's guarding the narrative now, and we see what happens going forward. Because I think one of the reasons we're seeing all the panic now in the streets is because the media is panicking. So the media is panicking, and they need clicks, they need attention, and they're losing attention to like Alex Jones. So they deplatform Alex Jones, then racism gets clicks, so they start pushing various panic, because they're panicking themselves.
I agree with that. I find myself thinking more in terms of weather patterns with these matters now. Like what you said is all true. However, I find there's like a perspective of these social systems that are herd movements. While it's easy to find perpetrators and assign them identities and give them stories, and that may even be 100% appropriate, I find that at least I enjoy and I suspect I find more predictive the idea that you have this group of people moving over here. It's not necessarily good or bad. They were forced out of their old place, and so now they're going to add pressure to this place. And we're kind of seeing these in that sort of sense. We see these, tornado environments where like the media does this, but then that creates pressure there. So that herd will then move into more BitChute, which, feeds back the loop. These types of themes. I'm reticent to. There's nothing wrong with what you said. I think the only thing I'm trying
it's
to.
It's almost like fluid dynamics.
Yes, I'm reticent exactly, and I'm reticent to like assign morality even to. And this maybe fits into what Al and I will discuss, but I'm reticent to assign morality to these things at this point. Like there were times when they were easy bad guys, but now there's enough moving parts to where it's indiscernible who was the prime mover on any of these things. To me,
I've suggested it might be helpful to think of the COVID thing and then perhaps some of the other ones you name, like the Y2K and stuff, but as like a type of economic coordination. So our political leaders are falling in line globally, not perfectly cooperative. It's competitive. Like some nations might want to act against other nations, but I wonder if that's helpful to think of it as like an economic movement. Like we need to slow our economy down because other nations are too.
Absolutely. There are these open conspiracies in society, and there was an open conspiracy, if you will, amongst the Corona believers, such that like they were united by a spirit of like wanting to change the system. It seemed to me. So as a herd, I think that they made concessions in ways that privileged or prioritized people who would escalate the response effort. I think there's an economic incentive for them to do that, even principally. So I agree. It's again in the sense of like the sort of like dynamic. Oftentimes you can align people by a spirit of greed. Oftentimes there are negative emotions, unfortunately. But yeah, if you see that there's a latent greed in this group of people, you can then appeal to that and move them in a coordinated way. So that probably is in fact economic.
Yeah, some people would think that's terrible, and some elites are trying to control us, and we're sheep. And then in another way, it's like, no, yeah, we are sheep, and yes, they are. They're politicians.
Yeah, I agree exactly. Well said.
That is part of the social contract, I think.
So how is it going in the States? What we see is clashes of protesters, and perhaps with the police, perhaps with different groups. And is this going to escalate? Is this a problem? Is it just very small?
So I did some traveling a few months ago. I can only give you some of my anecdotal experience based off of that. I would suggest not to trust anything you see on TV. Principally, the motivation is to sell watch time. So that perverts a lot of the reporting off the bat. But then in addition, there are advertiser concerns. So the revolution will never be televised as a result of concessions to advertisers. Like the principal customer is the advertiser. So if you're not selling Cheerios and you're instead like empowering the overthrow of the government, that you're not going to sell any Cheerios that way. So,
And speaking
that's
of
one
which,
thing.
I want to say we are live on Shaw Wars, so everybody can go vote for their favorite guest right now on shawwars.com. You just need a Relay X wallet or a Money Button wallet, and you can get started today on shawwars.com.
Stephen King was supposed to be here. I would vote for him, not because I want to sabotage your system, but he has like these. He wants to be a people person, so I would just give it to him. Anyways, so I did some traveling around the United States, and I only went to a few places. I went both East and West Coast, Cambridge, Boston area. Then I was in Philly, and then I went up to San Francisco. That was most of it. I went by train in some places, so I had to see the outsides of the cities. Then I also have friends that I hear reports from, and then on the ground I have, as I travel, I talk to people, try to get stories. At the time I was going, that was during the height of the Corona mania, and people were like scared to leave their homes even. I noticed that in the affluent areas, such as Cambridge and San Francisco, actually, there was a hypersensitivity, I think, to the corona. I have a theory that professionalism is heavily weighted by the medicine field and its aesthetic. You can see this in varying ways. Like when you go to the museum, for example, it's a very sterile environment. It's a professional environment. When you go to the professional office, it's very sterile. White walls, typically, cleanliness almost to the degree of like social signaling of cleanliness. And in any case, in those environments, it seems like there was a significantly greater amount of fear and neuroticism of the times. The corona being at the apex of the times, but it would be my consideration that the times were probably like the principal cause of the neuroticism. This is my anecdotal, not a doctor, but like what I kind of saw. So social distancing was like really put into effect in Cambridge. Like going to the supermarket, like you had to have, like everybody had to be exactly in their place in the line. Whereas like you compared like Florida, we're really not like that. In fact, there was, I think, like the Target that's right next to me had made national news because a group of people were like playing music and running around without their masks on and get everybody to take their masks off. So like the contrast between what is like, in my mind, like an upper class area of obeying rules and then what I'm used to was very extreme. When I went to Philly, I noticed a lot of the start of racial tensions there for the first time in this whole thing. So there was Black Lives Matter protests, which were principally composed of white people, though there was a healthy mix. A lot of white women and their kept men.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if I'm allowed to use like the F word, but like that's, a lot of that struck as me as a apt description of the men in attendance, which I know is pejorative, and I don't know that I care because like that's be it illegal or otherwise, like that would be like my consideration of the type of man that went to these things when I was like a youth, and it was like a word that was in more common parlance. Mm-hmm. So like emasculated sort of men. And then I went to like San Francisco. I almost got into two fist fights on that trip. Very close. One was in Philly, a racial conflict, which was weird because in Philly, I was in this hotel and I was just hanging out, and some black kids came to check into the hotel, and they didn't like that we weren't wearing our masks. It was kind of a low class place, I would say. So like day laborers, blue collar kind of guys, we didn't really care. And these black kids came in, they were wearing masks. And then all of a sudden it just got super racialized. And I was like pulled into this, was starting to become a fight over the masks in the lobby of this hotel room. And then the owner came, who happened to be white. And then he kicked out the black people. And then they just kind of let that feed into this story in their minds that there was some kind of like, bigotry going on at the hotel, which I don't think meant to materialize, but optically it was understandable that would be like a story that was told.
That would be a good example of a metaphor for what's going on.
100%. 100%. Yeah. These are a lot of microcosms for like the whole in a lot of these political things. And then in like San Francisco is a weird place. My sister lives there, but like she's not. I just don't assimilate in that culture, it seems. And the contradictions are like everywhere. And I don't know how to even respect the rule when that's the case. So there was a mix there of out of city types that I happened to socialize with, who were reticent to follow the herd with the masks and the hysterics, and then there was the sort of San Francisco types who had a sort of arrogance, I think, about the masks. It's almost entirely a social signaling game to me. In any case, that kind of feeds into the politics, where you have these weird optics that I think the politicians have completely lost the plot on. Like we all kind of agree to stories that kind of make sense, and then we promote this story, and then it kind of resolves the situation. But we are stuck in these like interactions now where there's too many stories, all of which can apply, and it just becomes chaos. So, leading into now, I can't help but to think that's kind of what I see around town. I think there's a pretense of clean teeth that we all know is the operating protocol with other humans, but it's specious and it's superficial. It's very it's not very deep. And if you try to bring anything deep up, it very quickly becomes political, so people don't do it. So there's a bit of like a pins and needles, walking on pins and needles kind of thing that I think is there. But it kind of depends too. Like, it's very much a function of the place that you're in. I think as assimilation is breaking, like the supermarket becomes this weird like melting pot, and like that's dangerous now to go to the supermarket because you could have varying social classes that could be meeting there and races. But when you leave that area, then you're back in your neighborhood, and you're back at maybe your bar, and now things can be more comfortable again. That's what it seems like to me. And people listening may or may not agree. I don't know. That's my experience based on some of the things I've been looking at.
I think people are a lot more familiar with kind of the protocols, and they're going out more regularly. I don't know. I don't see people really combating any of the social or public space recommendations too often.
But where are you at?
Midwest right now.
Okay. Right.
The supermarket's an interesting case. And where I'm from, they have arrows telling you which way to go down the aisles, and often the Maskies, if you call them that, or the people who have these masks, they don't follow them, they go against them. Do you have that where you are?
Sure. We have that, but nobody respects those in my town.
Right.
What about first responders? Where I'm at, the police, fire, and whatnot, they rarely show up in any type of PPE. It's obviously not a concern to them. I don't know if y'all have noticed. We had
a bad deal over here. We're having problems with that.
In February and March, you saw this national cry that every first responder needs massive amounts of PPE, and not just masks. They need face shields and goggles and, full-on bio-hazmat suits. And people were wearing them around. And that was a lot spurred, I think, by these fear porn photos that China was leaking to us of, people dying in streets and shit like that. And none of that ever materialized in the West. But it was enough to panic everybody. But now it seems like at least the rational people, most first responders generally have a good head on their shoulders. And they're not panicking.
So I can tell you I know a couple people that are first responders here in Florida. So Florida, so we have like these, so like it's probable that we have like a Civil War environment or a pre-Civil War environment. And it's evident that you're going to have tension around the herds that are that are polarized and in close geographic proximity. So like Portland being the obvious case, where you have a blue city and a red surrounding country. And that's going to be a conflict hotspot. Florida, I would not be surprised. Florida's weird for a lot of reasons because we're kind of like almost a Caribbean country or Latin American country in many parts of the state. But then you go north and it becomes like deep south very quickly. But so it wouldn't surprise me if Florida does become a hotspot. We also have in Florida a history of just like probably the most overt redlining like in the country even, wouldn't surprise me, because we have, the case of Palm Beach is the easy example, where you have some of the most expensive real estate in the world, and on the other side of the moat, some of the worst ghettos. And that's true for many of the areas up and down the coast here in Florida, including mine. So I live in a nice island here, but then you go over the bridge, and as you head inland, it rather quickly becomes like sharecropping descendants. So it can get a little rough. And I've noted the first responders that I know have all been moving out of the area because the salary, I think, for first responders is not going to put you on the island, but it'll put you in with the sort of inland area, and they don't want to live there because they know what some of these neighborhoods are like, and they're not a good place to raise your kids. And then they also, in their case, this is perhaps unique to them, but who wants to live with if you're a police officer, you don't want to be living with like the people you arrest. Like, that's a bad situation.
Yeah.
So there's that. So they've been getting out of the area, and I've noticed that like in my gym, we had a number of cops. They all pretty much have moved north to avoid this. So it's becoming a bit of a ghost town in first responders, I think, which is probably not a good development. That means the middle class maybe is eviscerating as the upper and lower classes polarize. And I know Miami Beach just started doing its own sort of who was the guy? Was it George Zimmerman, the one that killed the kid doing a neighborhood watch up in like North Florida?
Yeah.
Yes.
So Miami Beach started doing that kind of policing. And I can see why, because like the situation becomes weird. You don't really know who the cop's allegiant to, and the cop really shouldn't have had to make that calculus to begin with. But now with the politics being weird, they kind of do, and so it's just not a good situation there. The cops that I know, who I see, because we have the spot on the island I'm in is kind of like gentrifying, so we have some of the old and the new. And we get police coming in for varying reasons. A lot of the like service people are kind of like falling into despair, and in so doing are requiring more emergency services. But the emergency services guys are like very uninspired. They're not very proactive. They don't seem to want to risk their safety. I don't blame them. And it's a weird environment for sure, because you have like these upper class people who conceivably don't like them. And I get that. They have these lower class people that are like increasingly belligerent anyway. It's just like they can't really win. And I have mixed feelings, because like for most of my life I was not for the cops. And even now it's like hard for me to be for the cops, but like we need cops, no doubt. So it may be that we have to like return to an environment where like our own are the cops, and like every neighborhood has like their own cop. And that's not a positive development, because that's very quickly going to turn into like, gang style, policing. But that may be what we're headed towards. I don't know.
It's sort of going straight to the meta, but is Trump going to win for sure? Is he going to win by a landslide? Is that what you're seeing?
I think I'm not a demographer. This is kind of weird. I like Trump over Biden, so like I'm a bit inclined to skew in a sense of bias, but everything's like weirdly backwards. Like a lot of the like low income people are very pro Trump. I happen to be like the island happens to be like a Trump island for across the sort of spectrum. I don't know exactly why that is, but it does happen to be. So you go to my island, there's pictures of like, there's a guy down the street who has a flag with like Trump and his machine gun telling the viewer no more bullshit. And there are Trump signs everywhere. And you go to like street polls and things, and it's very obviously like a colony, like a Trump colony. And I'm okay with that. I feel safe in that colony. I like those values. But it's also kind of weird, because we have these buildings that I suspect are full of blue people who are just kind of like meek, and they don't express their blueness. And I don't sense that we're getting a proper gauge of what people think here. Because if you look around, it looks like Trumpville. We have parades and such, like water parades for him.
What did it look like in 2016?
It was not that overt in 16. In 16, I think more people were on the sly with their Trump support. Now I think people are more on the sly with their Biden support. What I've campaigned for locally, and which I believe, is that there is effectively like a nihilist platform behind Biden. That's what I see. You ask people why they like Biden, they won't tell you anything that they believe about Biden. They'll tell you everything they believe about Trump. So it's like, okay, your position is it circles around Trump. It may be like a negative velocity, but like you are defined.
I would argue, aside from his immediate family, 100% of the Biden voters are voting against Trump.
Right.
Yeah, there's
100%.
And in 2016, there were these people that would say, "Oh, I'm voting for Trump," that you would never think would ever vote in their life, and Trump inspired them. I've found an equal number of people this time around who have never been to a ballot polling location, but now they're voting. They're voting for Biden, and for whatever reasons, mainly it's just because they think they have to hate Trump or that he's a threat. But I've heard wild things coming from people who really have no business having a political opinion, but now they have super strong opinions that they're willing to almost die for, and it all has occurred in 4 years.
That's the Hollywood bot army.
I don't think you can win with that as your platform. Vote against Trump, though.
I don't think so either, because it's one side is campaigning about Trump, and that's Trump, and the other side is campaigning about Trump, and that's Biden. And
our whole country was formed about the whole country was formed about being against something.
Yeah,
we really like it down here,
and that's also kind of how we won in 2016, anyhow.
But as far as the divisions arise, I do worry about massive polarization between both electorates.
I think people are going to be tired of voting, is what I suspect. I'm not going to vote. I might actually show up and turn in an empty ballot. But I would like to see the voting
myself. But
what I want to see and what I hope to see,
president on the ballot, if you wanted to.
That's what I'll probably do.
Yeah,
probably what I'll do. And I do that almost as a Trump supporter, which is weird. I don't know that that's something I should encourage or not, but I would like to see the voter turnout get very, very low. And I think that there's a good possibility that happens. If the voter turnout is low enough, then we'll probably get some representation, is what I'm thinking. And there's a whole path that'll be, but I'm thinking that's what we're going to see. I'm hoping that's what we're going to see. So maybe I'm just like skewed there, but I'm hoping we get a voter turnout of like 40%, something like that. So like less than half the country felt compelled to have a decision on the matter. And I would just like to see that kind of thing happen. Personally, because then we can do things like, okay, well, nobody really wanted this. Like this is just absurd. And then we could just be like, okay, we're going to have a sanctuary city. We're going to do things our way. And like, yeah, that's going to be, a major political conflict, but I think it's what people are going to want.
Do you think that people are actually going to come to the same realization about things regarding that percentage turnout that you just did, though?
All I can say is that in my neighborhood, I've been promoting that. The reason I've been promoting that, and I don't know if there's other Chris DeRoses out there, there probably aren't, but I make the point that it's far more American to not vote for president at this point because the parties are solely committed to demonizing half the country. So when voting takes that form, you're not voting anymore. You're just having a proxy battle. And so now you have to ask yourself if proxy battling is what's in the country's interests, and I don't think it is. So there's that. And then, the other thing that's very obvious is like you can write down all the, like, for me, the way I see it is professionalism took over the national ethic, and professionalism is just might make right. So every other value is going to get eviscerated. It's going to be rendered sterile. Like if you believe in, like God or something, which, I'm not a God person, but if you believe in it, that's fine, but you just get charged for that. And it's like, okay, well, that's not sustainable. And so I think that what we probably need to do is just come up with better voting systems where we can be represented. Because the point I was making was that, okay, so like you can put things down on a ballot on a piece of paper. Like what is it that you want as a citizen? Maybe you want like, I don't know, like reduce carbon emissions, or maybe you want like drastic change in the school system, or maybe you want, international separation. All these things you could write down, and then you could just throw that piece of paper away because it's completely irrelevant. You have, a choice of blue and red, or woke or based, and it's just not voting anymore. So I think you're doing more harm by telling people that they're voting when they very evidently aren't, in my mind, than you're doing good. So that's the way I see it. I don't think that'll be a popular opinion. It probably won't catch on, but eventually it might. I don't know.
I could see the possibility that it does.
I mean, if only idiots voted for president and the rest just voted for mayor, we'd probably have a better country.
Yeah, I agree. And not only that, but then we'd also be able just to dismiss the whole thing. We could just be like, okay, well, look.
Exactly.
This is just for stupid. It's a trap for the idiots. Like they're voting. I mean, it's becoming crusader politics. Like you're voting. Here's where it gets really interesting to me is you're voting for like the person who will vanquish the enemy. It's just the crusades will follow. It's, the saviors are lining up for who will save us. So like come election day, what's probably going to happen is half the country is going to realize that their savior was defeated and there's no hope. So if that's the kind of politics we're playing in, we can expect, like arsons to start after that, and then skirmishes and battles from there.
I mean, that's what happened to the left in 16.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I suspect the arsons will be like the next thing. Like we're already starting to see that, but the function of the politics is in fact to press people to form a consensus. Like you'll see this in every room over time, is that there's value in having a consensus opinion. And if you push it too hard, like people throw fists, but if you push it at the right amount, then we can have things like, the right side of the road versus the left side of the road, and there's a major efficiency. But when the politics are working poorly, people are increasingly incentivized to press for consensus. And the way they're going to do that is what you're seeing, where they're in the streets. If that doesn't get people out of their homes, then they'll just light their homes on fire. Like that'll be the next step.
Has the large street movements of Europe, the yellow vests and stuff, has that resulted in any real change or no?
I mean, Brexit is a change. I would say no. I mean, at the heart of it, we're all like Bitcoin types. So like at the heart of all this, like we know the money, like the game of Monopoly was won. Like that's the deal. We all know it. We have universal basic income. It's called indexing. And like there's these solutions that are out there, and we're supposed to sell them. And I don't mind selling them, but it's gotten hard for people to sell. Not the professionals are supposed to be the ones selling this stuff, and they gave up. That was their job. Their job was to sell like indexing. Their job was to sell assimilation plans, and they gave up. So now it's like on us, like the sort of citizen, to start deciding if we can sell it or if we're going to do better. And the Bitcoiners told us they could do better. I say they because I just don't identify with any of this like virtue signaling nonsense that it turned into, and that's a shame. Not that the movement's over with, but like people got to get serious, and we'll see if they do.
Are you including BTC and BSV as Bitcoiners, or you mean BTCers?
I left it undefined. Like, I mean, the question should be out there, right? Like, you have to decide. I don't think this project called cryptocurrency is a failure. I do think that we have systemic issues that will wipe out some of these currencies. So, like, maybe this will get into JAWS, like the issues I have with JAWS, ideal money pursuit, respectfully. But like Bitcoin's like liquidity comes from Tether. Okay, that's not cool because Tether is the most easily censored product that we've ever had. It's not censored, so be it, but it could be at any time, and that's a major risk. The way to offer a advantage in these environments is probably not with publicly auditable blockchains. Like fungibility is going to be what you want in these severe political environments. And these types of issues are what I see affecting us. So I would not be the least bit surprised if these issues are forced to be resolved sometime. At which the powers that be it's time to clean up house. We'll see if that happens.
Just a relevant sort of but tangential topic, but do you see inflation coming in, say, the United States because of all of this pandemic stuff?
Financial portfolio is structured in such a way as to bet on that. So I do see that. Yes, I may lose that bet. I won't go insolvent, but I've invested heavily there. That thesis.
And you don't call that just a hedge. You're betting on it. You're going to gamble on it.
I'm not throwing the weather load into that gamble, but if you evaluate my portfolio, you will find that it is overexposed to risks that are commensurate with an inflationary economic environment. So well, I mean, I guess underexposed to inflationary risk, but I like cash flow producing assets. So real estate's been great. I love real estate. That's a great way to hedge against inflation. Probably, we'll find out if the real estate prices take a big collapse. I have some crypto. I don't really hold that much cash. I do have enough, but not a crazy amount. And I have some stocks and bonds. I think the stock market will probably take a big tumble some of these issues are going to be resolved by cutting down on the internet's bullshit. And it could be the case. We're seeing this with TikTok that POTUS just says okay, these social networks now have to follow these rules, and then the internet websites lose a lot of money, which is responsible for the majority of the stock value. So there's that. There's a lot of risks out there. You can make a great case for and against anything, but yeah, I try to keep money out of paper fiat and take that money, put it into real estate, and rent. I rent my landlord, so that's how I see that. What's nice about being a landlord is that when inflation goes up, so does my rents. So I have constantly adjusted return there.
Do you worry as a landlord about the type of tenants you have and their politics when it comes to do you want honest people living under you, or can you even check that, or do you worry that you're going to have people under you who view you as an oppressor, and they think you're part of the whole capitalist evil?
Do you look for people that are trying to do the most harm to Chris DeRose?
So my tenants are pretty good. They bring up very good points. I noticed that there's not a lot of love for landlords out there right now. So if it would not surprise me, if something terrible happens to me, it's probably going to be because I'm a landlord. It would not surprise me if there's in some terrible battle between east and west parts of South Florida, the landlords get the axe, and then it'll be well, Chris DeRose, he found out the hard way, this or that lesson. And yeah, the neighbors gentrifying, and the people who are getting the curb are not happy with me because I'm the one who's putting them out. I'm probably going to buy another property here even before the end of the year, and they'd see me buying up the block. So while they're having a hard time making rent, I'm some punk ass with clean teeth who is, owning, many times the number of homes that they do. And so they don't like that. I give them free beer. That's maybe my solution. I give them free beer. It's the best I can do. And so I have because I'm a landlord, I end up with free beer as it turns out anyway. So I give that out. So see if that's going to stem the tide. Another thing too, I'll say, the lack of courage in America is so fucking disappointing to me. If it's my fate to just die in the witch burning, I've had 38 years here, it would suck. I don't want to live a life where that happens, but at the same time, it's I have zero regrets. It's just, maybe I lived in Rome at its peak. You can't get too greedy. You got to understand that you got to live your life and have some modicum of courage. And yes, there will be risk there. Especially if you're an investor, that's the deal. You're not, you cannot be so sterilized in your existence that you don't understand your relationship with nature. Mm-hmm. You gotta find that somewhere.
Online courage is on the rise, but in real life, courage is definitely at a nadir.
Yeah. Well, you should go. Here's the thing, okay? This is the stuff they don't really get into. You should go in the ghetto. The courage in the ghetto. All of this talk about diversity and the things we got to do for the people that are like, if there is an uprising and it comes from the ghetto, like I can't knock it after a point, because there's a matter of the size of the fight in the dog that we never give any attention to, and that is wholly relevant in all these discussions. And if we've lost sight of that, then we deserve to lose. And it's not the best environment, I would agree. But if you create an environment where that can't be discussed, then you're going to reap what you sow. So if you want to find courage, go in the ghetto. I mean, like, there are gunshots that go off, and there is a cowboy environment in some of these places. Story, but I can tell you that it's a lot more courage than I see exhibited online. So the courage exists. It just may be that the places we're looking are places of fear.
That's true.
Another thing that I'm wondering in the politics, because I see it here, it does seem as if the beach areas are very conservative, and I wouldn't be surprised if the party lines just divide based on like your proximity to the beach. So that'll be interesting, because you'll have a demographic of people who are probably like professional in their sympathies for the blue and haven't realized the alliance they've made with the people who are very quickly going to kick them out of their houses at gunpoint in so doing. And that'll be weird if it comes to that. Hopefully it won't, but I see that. So like the people who think that they're going to bestow upon the ghetto like opportunity in their like bank, they may find that's not the kind of opportunity that the ghetto wants.
Yeah.
Also, like a good example of that.
Go ahead.
Just a good example of that. So like the islands are their own socioeconomic classes here, and I'm on like a nice island, but the island north of me, the home value there is like $100 million plus, and all that separates it is a moat. So like there's not even that many people there. So I wonder if there isn't going to be like a Black Lives Matter march through those houses if they don't watch it. I don't know what the plan is. People aren't really thinking. So we'll see. It's just weird to me to watch, because like if I gave you like a guided tour, like you can almost see the lines. It's like they might as well just put them on the ground.
It's like literally water that separates them. You're saying they just need to say, "Oh, let's get a boat."
I mean, if you go to Los Angeles, there's literally one block. I mean, it's not even water that separates literally Skid Row from like totally high-end apartments.
You could be at a movie premiere on the red carpet and turn to your left, and there's some dude shitting in the bucket. Like
right across the street.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know. I always thought I lived in Florida. I live, I guess, pretty close to where Chris is. I lived in West Palm. I lived in Palm Beach Gardens. I lived in Palm Beach Gardens for a while. And I lived in Los Angeles, Long Beach for a while. And I mean, to me, like, Los Angeles is more of a cauldron than South Florida, for sure. Because, like, in Los Angeles, like, every race has its thing about another race, and then you have the economic thing on top of that, and then every little, like, Compton is its own thing, and like Watts is its own thing, and Gardena, like these little communities are just kind of like, can be very, very different, and it's literally a traffic light that's separating them.
I think in Florida we have a like a bourgeoisie Latin class
for sure.
That has that probably enables like more. Is it like a more like I don't know, sensible ethic maybe? But I'm not sure about that.
I think it's where they came from. They came from mostly communist areas, socialist areas.
Exactly.
So they have a whole different mentality. In Los Angeles, like every ethnic group has its bougie class. Like there's really rich Vietnamese. There's really rich Japanese. It doesn't. There's Mexicans that are our first generation that started a business in SoCal, and they live in the high end of on the hill in Long Beach, overlooking everything. Like it's the number of divides in Los Angeles in the Los Angeles area was just more obvious and apparent to me than when I lived in Florida. I don't know.
The place I think is really coming to a point in Florida is the school system, and I'm watching the neighborhood arguments around that, and that's kind of pushed onto us by the politicians at the national level when we have all of these hysterics around what the colleges are doing, begetting these questions. But that seems to be where, in the socioscape, a lot of the friction is right now. And I think what's going to happen is a lot of the single parent households are going to probably overvote the 2-parent households, and that's going to get real weird. We'll probably have white flight as a result of that. So I could see 2-parent households going north, letting the area become a single parent household dominated culture. And then you'll have the childless hanging out on the, like myself over here on the islands, who have to deal with that.
Yeah, if I had kids and I could afford it, I would not send them to a public school. I would get them far away from.
So what you should consider,
get them far away from people that have to rely on the public school system as fast as possible.
Right. So what you should consider is that it's a good tactical maneuver for the lower classes to impose public school onto you, and that's probably what would happen or will happen, is my suspicion. So you have these glaring contradictions wherein the mayor sends his kids to private school and lords over the public school system, and I don't think that's sustainable. I think what will happen is the single parent households will be like, no, if you're gonna lead us, you're gonna deal with the problems we deal with, and you're gonna send your kid to public school. And even in the professional class, you can see I really can't say enough bad things about professionals. I know that offends people, but it's good. But in the professional class, you have these people that are telling us how to make the world a better place by doing these schemes, like diversity being an easy one. And then you ask and find out, where is it that you live and what school do your kids go to? And it's completely contradicting the thing they tell you that you have to do.
It's like having a fat doctor.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. And worse still is if you bring that up, then the punishment will be that your children have to go to public school. The scheme has a few moving parts, and there's some levels of indirection there. But if you go to your work and you say, why am I doing this diversity thing? You may find yourself out of a job, and then you will find all of the pressures that come to bear, the least of which is that you were probably well paid to promote this scheme. And one of the benefits of being well paid is that your kids get to go to a better school, and they don't have to do any of the things in this scheme. So you have this duplicity in the actors that I don't think are sustainable. And some politician, and who knows, maybe even myself, but we'll point that out, is that you can't force me to do this scheme when you yourself are the primary perpetrator of the scheme, the pretense for having to do this. So you got to pick one or the other. And if you're going to force this upon us, then you can no longer be the leader. It's going to be like that. And I think that would actually win a popular referendum in any environment where you have single parents struggling to get by, driving by a private school on their way to work, knowing that their children are effectively doomed from the opportunity that school imposes. It's this is part of the sort of microcosm of optics that we started with in the lobby.
I lied about my address through high school to avoid such a fate.
Yeah. We all do.
Really?
It's an open conspiracy. We all know what it is we're fucking doing.
Yeah.
And that's coming home to roost. That scheme, it required a lot of moving parts in order to continue. And those moving parts, they stopped. And I don't think we've really digested what that means yet. So, and you know what? I guess it's a good thing.
A lot of it isn't so much that these people who have been subjected to all these trainings or public school or whatever, they're not going to say, okay, well, let us get involved and rebuild. They're just going to pretty much say, no, we're going to drag everybody above us down to our level. So there won't be really much of a solving of the problem. It'll just be a backwards keeping up with the Joneses.
Yes. Well, you got it right. So they're right. And you know what? I got to say, it's bad for the country. I get it. but only in the short term. I think in the long term, that's going to be good. Like the professional class has this short-termism. Really, Americans do, but like have to blame the professionals for leading us here. They have this short-termism environment, and that short-termism requires us to do things like propel our family to the top, and America be damned. It's not sustainable. So like nobody wants to be the generation that has to cut the fat, but that's probably what we're going to find ourselves having to do. And I probably would opt out of that. Like if I was raising a kid, I'm just not going to be the one to do that. You know, like it's a sucker's bet. I'm not that good a person. And so that'll probably come to some kind of conflict, I'm guessing.
And I think that most Bitcoiners, if that's really a group, would be on those lines too. They recognize all the conflicts, but they're not going to be the ones who they sort of realize how futile it is to play.
Okay, so can we just jump a little and compare that to the development of the protocol? And you can include the arguments of whether BSV or BCH is the true protocol. There's a comparability there, is there not? You have voters, and you have politicians in the space that are promoting changes.
Definitely.
I haven't had the patience for a lot of like these discussions. I don't mind having them. I think they should be had, but it's like anytime you have them, the maniacs get more airtime than the sober people, and you end up getting labeled a rapist or something ridiculous for like saying that Bitcoin has a leader. But yeah, it's just crazy, right? Like there's only so much patience I have at this point. The way I see it is we have these like structural lies that could have been glossed over under the right leadership, but we didn't have that. It's not exactly anyone's fault because like social media also like imposed upon us like this manic environment. Probably nobody could navigate. Now you're at this point where you have these ticker symbols. There's still a camp of people called the maximalists who have all of these different justifications and rationalizations for why the field of ticker symbols doesn't exist. But I'm not as smart as them. I just see that there's a field of ticker symbols. So I'm going to go with what I see. I'm okay not being the genius that, Saif and Dean or what the Steven guy, these people are. And I'm going to default to trusting my vision. So now you see that you have multiple competing leadership teams for Bitcoin. And the question of whether or not like one is true or false is kind of a matter of force, I think. Like how many like battalion soldiers can you like devote to like enforcing this identity? And like the answer is 0 all around. So then it becomes like a faith-based thing, I guess. And I don't know. I have to say, like I strongly suspect that Bitcoin probably is going to be the like Bitcoin Core is going to be the true Bitcoin only because it has the biggest market cap and not because of any justification or rationalization. So that being the case, the way that you should fight for opposing that is probably by fighting against its source of liquidity, which is Tether. And then as soon as you like knock that out, and you may come to find that the next true symbol to rise doesn't have that liquidity issue, which may still be Bitcoin Core, or it may be another Bitcoin, or it may even be a different non-Bitcoin ticker symbol altogether. I don't know. But you have to consider that like if liquidity is the product, then what is true, it might just regress to a form of might makes right. So then whoever has the most liquidity is the winner. And then that's how I see that. Like it's not a matter in my mind of, I guess what I'm saying is it's like, I'm less of it's not that this isn't a worthy calculation, but I'm less of the mindset of like discovering what is true. I'm more of the mindset, we're going to create what's true. And so then the question is like, Chainlink is a perfect example of that we can get into.
Well, that allows
I think that's a better,
what you're saying to be irrational, right? And people are irrational. And it might just be that all of the rationalists are minority chains that exist.
So rationalism is a bitter pill, and it's a long conversation I'll try to spare us. But like most, like you have to ask yourself, like, is Christianity a rationalization, and I think it is. And so then you have to ask yourself, like, okay, like what is irrational in that sense then? And it often comes down to like what is proper. And I can walk you through that, and you can disagree with that, or it's a theory, but like it helps. The definition of rationalization here, that will probably be more useful. The action of attempting to explain or justify behavior or an attitude with logical reasons, even if these are not appropriate. That last like stanza there, even if these are not appropriate, that's where it becomes a matter of propriety.
Propriety is a special word in my works.
And say it again.
Propriety is a special word in my work, so I use that a lot, and it's a very helpful word, I believe.
My words, my space words, is that what you said? Or
in his work, yeah, I'm pretty sure he said.
In your work, gotcha. Yes. How do you decide what's proper? Like that's even at the heart of the politics as well. Like what? So like that question, I think has a very easy answer actually, but maybe you have something.
Well, you might not be able to extrapolate the answer, but it's in the direction of what everyone accepts. Like the group decides propriety would be what I would say.
Agreed. Yeah. Okay. So what you may come to find, what I've come to decide, this is kind of like a postmodern thesis, like beware, but it's good thesis. Harvard decides what's proper. And that the center of the truth regime is Harvard University. And you can see this in almost all of academia. Like Stephen, who was supposed to show up today, who didn't, is like never going to be able to even comprehend this because he's been fully institutionalized. But if you haven't been fully institutionalized, what you can see, seemingly, is that if you put like academics in a room and they have to say like what is ideal money or some such thing, what happens is they arrange themselves into a moral hierarchy, principally by their degree, and whoever is closest to Harvard wins the argument. So that's how propriety is affected in most situations in society. It's also why people with college degrees are worth more. You can have a Harvard education very easily, and you should. It's not even that hard. I mean, you got to work hard, obviously, and you got to read a lot, and you got to watch a lot of lectures. But there's no barrier to entry. However, the degree is where the barrier to entry is, because the degree is what allows you to dictate the prejudice and determine propriety. So you can be just as educated and probably even more educated than a degreed individual, but you don't carry the license to create truth. So like that's like the sort of postmodern angle on propriety and rationalization. And so when we look at a lot of these systems, it could be considered that this framework of evaluation, or like the incidentals related to that framework, could explain what people think.
Jal, do you think that's true?
In terms of propriety.
I don't look at it as in true or not true. It's a framework, right? And I'm interested in, so now Bitcoin came along and it was presented stripped of anything such as a Harvard label, was it not? So how do you relate those? Because it's becoming...
Bitcoin is kind of like a secular religion in my mind, and as an origination myth, so rationalizations typically, in order to be proper outside of the university system, and universities rarely offer rationalizations. Like they're often very anti-rationalization, almost by edict. But typically, if you want to offer rationalization, you need a martyr, typically. And from the martyr will spring forth some matter of propriety, because there's like skin in the game, and there's meaning and sacrifice. And so that becomes a proper sacrifice or a proper justification from there. So in the case of Bitcoin, we actually did have an academic heritage, interestingly, in the sense of like Hal Finney's involvement and such, Wei Dai. But I think what really propelled that rationalization forward was the martyr of Satoshi. So like that might be chalk one for BTC as the true Bitcoin, though I don't think that Bitcoin Core is in any way offering BTC at this point. So like that BTC, you can get BTC. It's going to be the Bitcoin.Foundation. Bitcoin Core, I don't think is BTC. It's sort of like the Microsoft model of embrace and extend. And I think we all think that they're probably, sympathist to non-BTC tokens. But like generally, that's how rationalizations are born. So it's a bit of a. I understand that it's a bit of a like a contradiction in terms, because like there isn't a logical reason why a person should have to die to create a story that becomes true, but we see it evidenced in front of us all the time.
Absolutely.
So that's yeah. Jal, I think that answers your question. Whether it's logical or not, it's like kind of the audience has to decide.
So when you refer to
here's a quick aside. The audience kind of is deciding on shawwars.com. Chris, you're in the lead right now with 19
Thanks,
votes.
Everybody.
Jal, you got 8 votes. You could vote for yourself if you wanted to. That's kind of how that system works. It is anonymous voting. Generally, probably not on their end. They probably know.
I'm not so vain.
If it's your particular wallet or not. But yeah,
I just think it's funny when the politicians vote for themselves. I don't know why. This is like amusing.
There's going to be 1 week available after the broadcast to vote for this event on Shaw Wars.
Okay, so we got some campaigning time to do this.
You have some campaigning time to do, correct?
Okay.
So I was going to ask Chris, when you refer to sort of my concept of ideal money, or what it comes across to you as, what does it sound like I'm saying? What am I talking about?
So I have to confess, like I do respect you. I respect you because you have seen your writings. You're not an idiot, far from it, and you also you have gumption. You stick to it. I think you might just be smarter than me, honestly. On a lot of this stuff, I am not nearly as educated. I don't think anybody in this space is as educated as you are on matters of John Nash. That being said, what ideal money represents to me, I mean that. It's, like we have these bar brawls that are great. Like they're fun. But sometimes like the bar brawl is not the best way to like resolve an argument about like dentistry or something, like what you should do for like the dental patient. Like it's not the best way to get about. So like what Jal has to say, his perspective is specialized and it should be heard. And he very well may be mostly right or entirely right. Himself, like the victim of a world that has gone mad. So like, it's like so much you can do about that sometimes. That would be my concern in Jal's case. But the matter of what is ideal money to me seems as if John Nash substantiated in his ethical system what it would be to be a just form of money in all of his comprehensions of the world in his game theoretic system. Like it's kind of like a lightweight comprehension of ideal money, but that's what it always seems like to me whenever I see this broached.
Right. I would boil it down, like not even really arguing it or whatever, but there's an interesting concept of having the major currencies that exist today stabilize interrelationally. And I think that viewed in a certain way, Bitcoin can be that catalyst towards that. And so I would more be trying to point to that possibility.
I don't think Bitcoin can be that. I hate to be a downer, but I do think that we have that possibility in this space. I think Bitcoin is a victim of hubris and too much success too soon. And like I don't know that John Nash has a concept of community, how to put it, like adherence, I guess, in money that I understand. But the problem we have with Bitcoin is that we probably did not scale on the ground fast enough, and we kind of just sat on our laurels. So like the way that this space needs to mature is going to be in a way that doesn't associate us with these centralized liquidity centers, because they own us, or at least they own Bitcoin. And what's going to happen is when those liquidity centers disappear, Bitcoin's going to go down the pooper. If we have I've traveled a lot of places, but like Argentina has notoriously had a phenomenal solution to this problem. I was hoping we would see this here in America. We may. It depends on you guys, the listeners, a lot of other people. In Buenos Aires, you can go down these streets they have these sort of establishments, or like I don't know, like almost vaudevillian setups where there's like a guy that you talk to about the thing, and then in very little time you're exchanging money. That's what we're going to need in this space. I don't see Bitcoiners not going to do that. Bitcoiners are like the most pious people on the planet now, and they'll block you if you don't like the same flavor ice cream that they like. They're not going to have the gumption to do something like that. That's what's going to be needed. It'll probably happen. Actually, I would almost go as far as to say it's like a certainty. The question is going to be what is chosen.
What token they end up using in the blaze.
Correct. Or if they use a token, like it could end up being toilet paper. Like famously toilet paper, maybe something else. We had a toilet paper shortage, so maybe that's what we said. But someone has to go sell it. I can tell you that like okay, so here, like in my little area, I don't know if I should say this. Like, I think this is like a ability, but I'm going to say it. People have come to me, do exchanges. I've honored those exchanges, and they're not large sums of money. But these are people who are completely outside of our community, who have a need for cryptocurrency, and I try to exercise discretion. And all of these things, but these are small exchanges for people who are like friendly to me and who kind of know me. But that's the kind of thing you got to start doing if you want to see this thing succeed. And there is a latent need for that. I can guarantee you that. It's gonna be hard work. It's gonna take grit.
No, I think you're speaking to Bitcoin as like an everyday money for the everyday citizen. Is that correct?
I mean, candidly, it's mostly been like the Backpage types that I've been dealing with, who got locked out of Backpage, and I'm not like a model citizen. I'm not. I know these people because they're just good people, and they happen to be even my neighbors in some cases. I help them out, and it's something I like to do. They don't want to use an ATM if they can help it for varying reasons, most of which are benign. They're just fine people. They're just trying to make a buck. They're a little desperate. And the machines are complicated, and they're complicated because of all the laws you got to follow. And then some of these people, like who knows what their story is, but like scanning an ID is a problem. Some of it's just competence too. Like some of these people they're not that bright. Nice people, not that bright. So you have to do a little bit of like hand holding. Like this is a Bitcoin wallet. This is Bitcoin. And like they don't want to hear the story of Roger Ver and Bitcoin Core and the holy man who visited us, Satoshi Nakamoto. They don't want to hear any of that bullshit. They don't give a fuck. They don't want to hold Bitcoin. They have to use Bitcoin. If it solves problems, they'll use it amongst each other. And there's a need out there. And I bet you that need's even higher in the bad parts of town. This is in the good parts of town that I see this. That'll all go away with the press of a button if the liquidity centers are based on Tether. I would almost go so far as to say, like, it probably needs to be a demerit against the growth potential any of these tokens if it is seeing, exposure to Tether as a significant component of its liquidity. So, I mean, I made no bones about like my affinity for Monero. Like, I really like Monero. That's kind of my horse in the game, I guess, in terms of my gambling here, for reasons relating to this. I don't think Monero has as large a risk exposure to Tether. I wouldn't be surprised if there was like a market crash if Monero kind of like at that time popped up. How big the market cap will be, I don't know. But in terms of what I find to be ideal for me in a colloquial sense in this environment, Monero checks off a lot of the boxes that I like.
The sort of a jump again, but it's relevant. You did a BIP, sort of. Yeah, it was in a sense a stunt, but I think you felt you had a point. I did something similar, and I think we had a similar result.
For you,
what was yours about?
I proposed a mission statement, if I remember right, and thought that would just be. At the time, my hope was this isn't perhaps the right thing to do in retrospect, but I think it was the best idea that I could have come up with, and I think it could have worked in an alternate universe that we could have come to bear if we all got on the same page. But we could have followed an institutional model similar to like Wikipedia or, like TCP or IP or these types of things. And in a sense that there was like some pretense of leadership and values we could point to, instead of like this weird reactive thing that had no leader, that had a leader that everybody, you had to like really be dumb in order to believe. In any case, yeah, that's what I did. I proposed that we have a mission statement, and the mission statement I copied right from like the Linux Foundation mission statement. It was like the most benign mission statement. It was like it wasn't. I intentionally made it as apolitical as possible. So I don't remember it off the top of my head. So maybe we can find it. It was just like, we believe in sending digital money. It was just something like that, and it was just like a very basic like "We the People" declaration. And I will say, interestingly enough, the thing that I think probably worked against me is like the Ted Kaczynski problem, where like truth is illegal, and then the problem is that like the person who speaks the truth damns the truth, and then like that makes it like insurrectable, something like that. Like there's this weird contradiction there. You should go read like Ted. I know this is like a bit extreme. I apologize to everybody, but like you should read like the Industrial Future in a Society, and you should grade that paper. You should give it a grade. You should pretend that you're like an English teacher, and then you should read it. You should print it out, and you should read it, and then you should write the grade at the bottom. It gets an F, and it gets an F not because of anything that it says. It gets an F because Ted Kaczynski wrote it. Ted Kaczynski is a bad person, and that's why it gets an F. And like the same thing is true for like my BIP, and probably for your BIP. Like it could be completely true, but because you wrote it, it gets an F. Maybe I'm wrong. Like, what was your experience?
No, that's I understand all that, and that is exactly it. And I too tried to make it not just apolitical, but very non-controversial from someone who wants Bitcoin to really succeed. But by attaching some sort of a clarification to it of what the direction we want to take it, that then it gets an F, even if it's like very generic.
Correct. And then you have to ask yourself, like, why did Lightning get an A? Like, I don't even care about the technical merit of Lightning. Like, you may think that it was in fact the best thing to do or the worst thing to do. I think it got an A because of who wrote it. I think it got an A because it was inherently technically an achievement. I think it was that there was in fact a leader, and there are cronies, and these are like natural. It's not a conspiracy. This is the natural way that a company of men assembles. But I think,
absolutely. And then you're calling it for what it is, and of course you get this type of backlash about it, and that same thing. So my BIP. Yeah, of course, it's just not going to be heard. You won't be heard. Not in the great courts of where they make these discussions, have weight.
Right, and this is like a greater societal issue. Like opportunities is in fact squandered by this cultural obsession that seems to have developed. That I call professionalism. I think that's what it is. You can see it manifested in Bitcoin. Well, in some ways, I almost think that, the way that I went about it was doomed, because there probably is, in fact, a professional core in Bitcoin Core. So if that's true, then it matters less what we do and more who says it. That is not sustainable at all for society. That is just like a weird form of cronyism at that point. So,
I can take all of the esoteric parts out of my argument and boil it down to, I think we can make Bitcoin as gold was on the gold standard, where people don't need to spend it as their daily money, but something that like nations and high value institutions would settle with. And then it doesn't need all of this evolution of the protocol. It doesn't need to scale in the sense that people are arguing about how it should be scaled. And then so my bit becomes, don't change anything unless you're furthering that goal, which you already have it.
That's a fine attitude. in some of these things, you got to decide what it is you want. Are you here to get rich, or are you here to like make world peace?
Yeah, and then right, and if you want to convince people to do something the way you want it, it's sort of got to make them feel like they're going to get rich. But in this sense, you have like I call it the libertarian movement or the maximalists that are really trying to, and this is partly why Lightning got an A, because it solved or addressed the scaling war, which I think is kind of fake, but they want to scale it for the individual, and they want to create all this privacy for the individual, and that would be as opposed to using it as a large value settlement medium where you might not want it to be private if it's primarily used by central banks, for example. And so the attacks, the whole shitcoin thing, the whole, the infighting would make sense because they're not functioning on a logical premise. It's very leaning towards, I guess, libertarian ideals or anarchist.
Sure. Maybe. It's hard for me to gauge the culture of anything at this point. So like that's clearly a heritage, yes. Whether it's the current state of the network, I don't know.
To your knowledge with the technology on the base layer, does it scale to wash, say, the amount of coins that were stolen from Mt. Gox? Do you know this?
I don't know this.
Because everything that I can see, you can't. It doesn't scale because you need to do many transactions to sort of wash them and to make it so you can't track it analytically. And then, so you would want sort of bigger blocks if you wanted to wash large amounts of coins or large amounts of value.
I mean, my reactive answer is that like, why, if we're at a point where we have to come up with these contortions to create fungibility, then why don't we just put fungibility into the protocol?
And then I would say, obviously, fungibility isn't important if you just want to use it such as a gold standard.
Well, so note that you positioned the gold standard as like the frame of reference. Why wouldn't you just use the gold standard if you wanted the gold standard?
The gold standard was good in some ways, but then there's some limitations, such as if gold becomes the important thing, you'd want political control over the physical location of gold mines, and so Bitcoin doesn't have that same problem. And then you could say if gold became in high demand, there might be technological leaps where now all of a sudden you get supply shocks, and then Bitcoin has the DAA, the difficulty adjustment algorithm, that protects it from that kind of thing. So you could see that it doesn't have those limitations. So there's a little bit of a difference there.
There's definitely differences, and that I would suggest that like the custody issues are probably very similar. There are clearly differences. Like you don't have to worry about physical protection, but you still have custody issues as referenced by goal of how many washings are necessary. Like that would suggest that there's a identifiable custodian. So I think that you do have a form of custodian issues. Maybe it's mitigated. I don't think it's mitigated by all that much. And if mitigation is required, then why not just put it into the protocol would be my answer.
I think you're pointing to privacy when you say custody,
yes,
rather than okay.
That's an issue, but I think that was what was being expressed. I could be wrong.
Yeah, and so we can imagine if it's going to be the high value settlement layer, we would want to know what our banks are holding, and also we would want to be able to cut out the criminals. So that's the fungibility thing. Like I can't understand who's fighting right now other than the actual thieves to not censor the Mt. Gox coins. Like let's get rid of those at least.
So you suggested that we want credibility in the banks. I agree with you that citizens probably want that. But I don't know that the banks want that, which might be a matter of imposition required in order to create that degree of accountability. Because as I understand it now, the accountability is, sort of dubious, not because of a technical failing, but because of an intentional design. And my point being is that, like, we want banks to do this, yes. But it may very well be because we want that banks don't want that. And then what would be why would that make it an ideal?
Well, if we say we would want that, that would be our ideal. Ideal, another part of the definition is it's notionary or notional. We conceive it, but it's not necessarily reality.
Okay, so this is a great apex, because you understand then that there is a communal component to the aspiration, and it may very well be a matter of conflict. So what is ideal then becomes a matter of what can overcome the friction, more so than what it is that is desired by the state of the entire system.
And the way you describe that, it's easy to say that game theory is quite relevant.
Yes, agreed. So I think I'm trying to change the conversation away from matter of discovering the ideal, instead bringing the conversation into how do we decide and to enforce what we believe is ideal. I think is a more powerful outcome that Bitcoiners probably need.
Okay, so in that case, I think that the ideal is constantly being redefined by the conversation, right? And then if you're getting a better opportunity than some other offering, then that's a rebalancing. Every time you would want to transact or move to a different nation state coin or some other cryptocurrency that's offered, or assets of any kind, you're basically able to transmute between whatever to whatever, and you're less beholden.
That's a fine point. I mean, in that vein, something that needs to be considered is we have like a legion of real deal communists now who not only don't find Bitcoin ideal, but find money to be the problem. And so that creates a hostile environment where it would probably require collusion from a minority against the wishes of the whole in order to create a de facto currency.
Yeah, that's a fair part of the dialogue from them. I mean,
a lot of these kids, you're going to lose them as soon as you say money. Like they're really that far gone. I've been to some of these BLM things. They're just communists or aspiring communists. Like, they don't even know what that means probably.
That's correct.
So there's if you skip, I want to consider the ideal might be we would consider the possibility that we have all of the major currencies in the world stabilize interrelationally. So we don't have varying inflation patterns. We might not even say what inflation is, but all of the major currencies are trending, and they would be trending on the same line as Bitcoin, perhaps too, or not the same as Bitcoin, but the same in relation to each other, and then they would trend the same compared to Bitcoin, obviously. And then ask, do we have something that gets us to that?
I would think gold probably even does that in some ways. But I would point out that, and this is a problem I have with a lot of theories and ideologies, and I apologize in advance, but all of these contortions require some notion of good faith in the involved parties. So there are many.
I don't think so.
I'll tell you why here. So, like, the assumption is being made that we want a stable unit of account. In truth, we very well may want a world where the stability is available to some people and not to others. And
the same thing goes for credit markets. The same thing goes for credit markets. I mean, I think that those opportunities are going to exist across the board in general, and they're going to be location based. So then you're going to want currencies that are able to interface with those opportunities, and it might not be Bitcoin, or it might be a variant of Bitcoin, or it might be like a localized coin, as we see already. When hyperinflation occurs, like it's an opportunity perhaps as well, depending on what you're holding.
A lot of these ideologies and theories and politics are post hoc in the sense that the greed precedes the rationalization, the justification of the ideology. So it is more the case that I want any form of rationalization. Like that is the primary instigation for words to come out of my mouth. And so if that's the case, then I'll want Bitcoin in so much as it appreciates in value. And as soon as I feel that it doesn't have that opportunity, I no longer want it. So the belief that people are in it for the long haul because they want like a better world may not be a good first principle. It may be a good first principle that Americans want everybody else to lose except for Americans. And that by controlling the US dollar with guns, you can achieve that. And that makes me wonder if like the ideal money premise isn't a bit maligned right out the gates.
When you say ideal money premise, are you talking about the interrelational exchangeability, or you're saying like of a money that would be like the best money or something?
Money that would be the best money, but I would think it would apply in both cases.
I'm not sure about that.
Like, what is it, Gresham's law? Like people will often choose bad money to use.
Right. And I think Gell's condition allows that.
So there, we would have to unpack that. So what is bad money in Gresham's sense?
Okay, well, I mean, that's the question, right? Like the bad money in the Gresham sense is relative to the actor. So like relative to the person studying Gresham's law, like the bad money is the one that the actors are using. So it gets perverse because the one that is good to the actor is the one that is of low value. So he's going to use that money as a matter of preference because he can get rid of it faster.
Now, like there's this, and the idea is that the Queen created a fiat and then the gold was hoarded and sold and then whatever the fiat was being used. That's sort of the general premise. But if the Queen got word that the gold standard was corrupt in some sense, and like you better get off of it, and so her advisors had her create a fiat, and then this could save the queendom. That it would be a good money, and we look at it as a bad thing because it doesn't have the value of gold. But I have never found these letters that Gresham wrote, and anyone who ever cites Gresham's law, I've never found a proper citation to the letters. I suspect they don't say what we use good and bad money.
Economics has really let me down as I've gotten older. Like, it's really sad. I used to really like economics, and I still do. It just lets you down. All these things have started happening in recent years. Like what was once like very obvious stopped being compensable. That's true for a lot of the ideologies. Unfortunately, I mean, we're kind of like coming to reckon with some of the cold hard truths of I guess the institutions we created. One of which is that like a lot of this stuff is mythological. But, like Gresham's law might just be mythological. Like I don't know if that's exactly what you expressed, but it sounds like it.
Well, it's not a law of the universe, obviously, and people seem to speak of it as if it is. And then if they don't like a money, like I don't like fiat, so therefore fiat's bad money. And now I can give you my argument how Bitcoin's good money and Gresham likes it and it's moral. And that's sort of nothing. It's not a proper citation.
I mean, there's even Goodhart's law. Is it Goodhart's law? I think.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that. That was interesting.
Because that's an easy one, and that's like a sort of cornerstone. Goodhart's law is an adage note. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So that's just a mythology then. Like is it a law? Maybe, but only because like people believe it is. So it's a form of Tinkerbell effect, I would suggest, which is to say that if we all believe in Goodhart's law, then that makes it the law. But there's no rationalization or justification or et cetera that you can really like derive. It's something that we construct together, and that makes it a lot less empirical to me. and that's the field of economics is littered with this now. All really humanities are, and all the dismal sciences are, is that like what makes for an ideal money very well might be mythologizing and performing for the rube an act that convinces them this is the ideal money. And then if that's the case, then the ideal money is going to be the one that gets them rich quick. And that's disappointing.
Right. And that's where I was thinking of. So, and obviously with Bitcoin, I mean, as more and more people, like it can be saturated. So there's some point, and it's probably fairly early on relatively, where like you're going to get the richest gain, and then the later followers are obviously going to get less and less gain. And I mean, so it doesn't have that promise as you go along.
I mean, this is the Chainlink. Chainlink is one of the best products of 2020. I can't recommend it enough. Not in the sense that you should buy it, but in the sense that you should know its story. There's this form of like evidence dismissal that's rampant all throughout society, especially in the crypto space. Bitcoiners like refuse to acknowledge the success that is Chainlink. Yes, it is a scam, but that's besides the point. The point is that the mythology, the acting, took off principally on 4chan, and then to the rest of the world thereafter. And this complete nonsense soared in value in some amount of time, and that pattern's going to keep on happening. I don't think we can dismiss that. That is a recurring pattern. We saw it with Tron, we saw it with EOS, we saw it with Ethereum, we saw it with, over and over and over, Ripple, this always happens. And the act of performing get rich quick that is compelling makes for a ideal money in the short term. I don't know what makes for an ideal money in the long term, unfortunately, save for non-speculative value. And that seems to be predicated on liquidity and fungibility here in this space. It's my theory. So then the question is, like, are those the properties that make for ideal money? So, and that's a big if, to be clear. Bitcoin has half of that. It used to have all of it. It used to be a very fungible thing, and it is not anymore. So that's the way I see that.
I think it would have to be interesting to point out, like, we were having this conversation as a group, say Bitcoiners and then cryptocurrency enthusiasts, and they're fighting for what is the ideal money. And then there's these essays Nash did where he defined it, and it's defined as something very different than like what would the individual want. And then moving away from that a little bit, from a central banking or institutional perspective, they're not wanting something that they can make a lot of value off of. A very, very stable or non-deflationary, non-inflationary medium would be something that they would be interested in, depending on the cost to use it.
Well, let me ask you though. This might be in that vein. Is there an ideal money for a given time preference? And if so, the incentives here exist in such a way that people with short time preference are amplified expense to the preferences, the long-term type preference. If so, does that destroy the long-term time preference condition?
There's a subtitle to the whole works called that says the motivation of savings and thrift, which is kind of what you're asking, is to inquire into the types of money that you would want to save and the types of money you would want to spend, and what you would want and why. But it depends on how you define money, because something that you're using as an investment is, and to some people, it's not really a money. Like, money is that thing that's sort of quite stable that we all use to buy things with rather than to save. And
there, Lucian?
No, you're still
okay. I mean, money is very ephemeral, and I don't know that I believe that there's going to be an objective form of money. it may be the nature of money to be transitional. It may be the nature of money to reflect some group ideal in some environment, only to eventually succumb to the pressures of success and failures, and then renew itself. And I guess I don't know if there's enough nuance in the theory to explore money in those terms. I suspect that money is going to have to be that, but I'm not sure. The other thing too about Nash's theory is like, does it explain the rise of the dollar? It's another thing that I'd be like. As I get older, I find myself asking that more and more. Like, this is a good theory. I agree. It's airtight. Awesome. But does it explain how we got here? And if not, then invalidate it.
And that's the U.S. dollar you mean specifically?
Yeah,
like
I don't know if that's a good criteria.
It's not necessarily a good criteria, but I think it's worth doing as a thought experiment. Like, why is it that if like the theory was sound, why did it not predict the incumbency? Why is it so? Did Nash's is the U.S. dollar ideal? And if not, then what is wrong in John Nash's theory?
So part of
caused this to happen.
There's some other folks that like Nash that talk about like the pursuit of the ideal, right? Or this like asymptotic concept, and I think that can even morph into a description of the precursor change of monies that were used globally, right? These reserve currencies that maybe they were models in pursuit towards the ideal, right? And that the dollar represents like one iteration on the pursuit towards ideal.
The dollar, we're talking about the dominance of it, I think, or the reserve currency status of it.
Well, as it emerged, and why that happened, and if ideal money can describe that. And, it probably really doesn't in general, but if you're thinking about like constantly trying to get closer to an ideal, then I think maybe it is a stepping stone on the way.
And that's a product of Bretton Woods and the wars, though, right?
For sure.
And
yeah, at least
this is the problem I have
at least partially.
Libertarianism. Libertarianism has the same problem. If you accept this like line of inquiry, that like you have theories can oftentimes be like divided into one of three camps: prescriptive, which would be like the case of like religious texts where they tell you what it is you got to do; critical, which is like Marxism, and like not just Marxism. I mean, like even like critical thinking skills as like espoused in like the scientific method. These are ways of disproving what you see. Generally, like you see something, it's like, okay, well, is it because of what I thought, or is it because of this other reason? Those are critical theories. Then there's often descriptive theories, and those are like field journals, observations, amoral, typically. Like, this is what I see. There's no, how to put it, there's not necessarily a advocacy, it's just an explanation, and it attempts to predict. In any case, a lot of like the libertarian theories are prescriptive theories, similar to like religious texts, where they tell you how to create a good system. And there's probably a lot of value there, like that clearly worked for a long time. And we may regret having moved away from that model as a society. So in some senses, you're evaluating these theories in that prescriptive sense. We say to ourselves, like, wouldn't everybody be better off if we did it this way? And the answer is yes. But then the problems are that some people follow the book, and those people can be enriched at expense to those who do follow the book. It's a major problem in America, even. Like, if you haven't noticed, like, sometimes the worst people are the ones who are going to profit handsomely because they're bad. So it's like you have to ask yourself, well, what kind of society am I in? That invalidate prescriptive theory in full, which is probably the case, unfortunately, in a lot of ways. Then the question, why am I doing this thought exercise then? Am I doing this thought exercise because I want to determine what was, in fact, a great place we could have become? Or am I doing this because I want to understand why it is that we don't have that? Or am I running through this theory because I'm trying to sell others on getting towards that utopia? And one of those avenues are inappropriate.
Yeah, no, I think I understand all that, why you point that out. Like, so we start to theorize about the ideal, but what can we get with that? Like, you know, the libertarian knows what the ideal is. Well, okay, make your world, like, show me, bring it about.
Okay. You have like communists now running the streets. These are not, in my estimation, these people are not motivated in good faith. So then it's like, okay, well, we have the solution to the problem. You're ready, and then they're just gonna like throw a brick at you. Then you have to find other people who are like-minded, and otherwise, you're like your theory doesn't. I don't know what to do at that point. Is it that the theory doesn't work? Is it that the society stopped working? Is it? I don't know. I don't know.
Well, sometimes violence is the answer.
Oh, that's where we're at, unfortunately. You know, the libertarians. The truth is mostly creative. That's the deal. So, if we like this plan, we have to figure out how we're going to create it. We don't just like it and then it takes off. It has to create some mechanism fruition.
Of course, 100%.
By the way, this is why the dollar works. I think.
I thought the dollar worked because the petrodollar exists.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why.
And theoretically, that would make it ideal for the current time period that it's been dominant, right? Because it allows all these nations to come together in one marketplace and deal with exchanging energy.
Definitely.
And then we don't care what your culture is as long as you come with the dollar. That sounds like ideal money.
Agreed. Yeah.
There we go.
It is an ideal for at least navigating.
For now.
Yeah, for navigating the global oil markets, I would agree.
Until we all get our Bitcoin citadels.
But the Triffin dilemma, though, puts a wrench in that. And the whole COVID or the pandemic thing may highlight this, where the U.S. has a dual role here with its money. It has to serve the world with the reserve currency, but then it wants to tend to its own short-term domestic wants. And those goals aren't necessarily in the same direction.
Yeah, discussing it, I would not be surprised if like the preeminence of the dollar is days are numbered. Like we all kind of think that. So, but I don't know that Bitcoin is necessarily going to take up the slack. I would think that like the yuan would start to displace it from the Ethereum to the Bitcoin, if you will. That would be my guess.
What's the Taiwanese dollar called?
I don't know.
But now I certainly wouldn't argue Bitcoin would take it would take the dominance like gold would in a sense, but not necessarily how we think of the US dollar, because, I'm in Canada, I could probably go to most stores and pay with US dollars.
I think you got to create like demand. I mean, this is the theory right now, right? Like you have to create debt denominated in your currency. So in some ways, like maybe that's the Tether story, is that like Bitcoin did in fact create debt, a lot of it from this institution called Tether. And then lo and behold, we seem to have gotten a major boost in liquidity as a result. But got to figure out a way to get people to issue debt in the currency in ways that they can spread around. Which does that invalidate the ideal money theory even at that point?
I wouldn't say so either, because you're going to have credit markets, and it's people's choice whether or not they want to interface with credit.
Yeah, so that would be now relating to Hal Finney when he says Bitcoin-backed banks will probably exist, and they'll have their own private monies, and it will be intrinsically inflationary resistant.
We see Bitcoin. We've always had Bitcoin banks. They've been impressive, unfortunately, most of the time,
yes.
but they exist. And I think you gotta. I think you just gotta like start. You gotta like start a chain reaction, where you find some group of people who pissed you off, and you come in there with your tanks and you tell them this is how we're gonna do it, and we're gonna give you a loan, and now you got to pay us. Or you find some people that are desperate who'll do anything, and you offer to build them like an aqueduct, and they have to pay you back. And then as those debts start to form, that's what I think creates the demand for the currency. Doing it by choice, I don't. That clearly happens in the case of like gold, seems. But I don't even know about that, because gold is like a last resort kind of thing, and we don't really see people choosing it anymore. Anything like, why don't people use gold for gas? Why is there no petro gold market? I think there is in like Iran. I know Iraq had one for a very limited time. I think I know that. And because that money didn't have a military, it couldn't defend itself against the United States, I think.
That sounds correct.
Yeah, it's, a lot of what we are doing in society is reinspecting lies we grew up with. And I think one of those lies was that like the dollar is the best currency. And while it is true that a lot of people use the dollar, it's kind of dirty business. I don't know if there's a moral pretense in these matters. And maybe there should be. Probably there should be. Maybe there should be. But we may just be like trying to rationalize next money based on that initial preconception that was just state propaganda.
Are we the state, Val?
Say that again.
Are we the state?
Oh, are we the state? I find it difficult to separate it into state and people when each of the major states are in competition with each other, and I'm not sure they can act in cooperation against the citizenry.
What if Bitcoin is a state and people are choosing to interface with that as a secondary or primary economic state that they choose to transact through?
I think we skipped very quickly to state legalizing Bitcoin, and then like where we've transcended that duality.
I was dating an attorney for a good while, and they made the point that the legal environment only works when there's order. You're not going to have like attorneys on the battlefield who are going to like talk to the tank commander and tell you like what the law is about who you can and cannot blast with a rocket. But that's true for a lot of environments. Like legality is a kind of like utopic thing that we can use at times in our history, and then it just goes away. That's probably going to be the case with money as well, I think, and a lot of the rules around economics and money as well. So it doesn't mean that a lot of these theories are invalid. It just means that the strategy is like this is where like the academics often have a problem, I think, in that they like divide strategy independent of the imperfections of the world state. So you may, in fact, come up with something that is unequivocally ideal for everybody, but because you live in a world where you have like this dictator and like that institution, et cetera, there's enough bad faith in the environment to where like your plan could never work, even though like it worked out perfectly fine in all of these different ways. You still have to understand that you live in a world that is inherently flawed, and so you are then forced to accept sub-ideal solutions as a matter of rule.
But I think that's quite on point. If we're thinking of like the questioning about what is ideal, in a sense of like, okay, first of all, money to be ideal, it's got to be portable, it's got to be maybe fungible, this and that. And then we can think about maybe you can't have that. Like, what can we do with our economy? Well, what might be interesting is if we got off the American dollar standard, got onto something that no country controls, and then start to ask which ideal does Bitcoin fit? Is Bitcoin this money and this medium that like everyone can use? It's super cheap, it's super fast. Well, now you've created conflict and war and the Roger Veres and the core and all this. Or is Bitcoin limited? It can't be this ideal money in that sense. I think we could ask, could Satoshi ever have implemented it with all these great things, scalability, etc.? Or was there a trade-off there, and then it can bring about this other scenario that we could call ideal? That's the definition I've been using, the latter.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I guess what good? This is a problem in so many different ways in society. Like, what good is an ideal if it stands no chance of execution? So, like, you can ask everybody in the world, maybe, like, what is it you think we all want? And they might be something like healthcare, or maybe, I don't know, keep the planet from overheating and exploding. Like, everybody should theoretically agree on that. Whether or not that's the case, maybe we'll disagree, but we can all agree that we need this planet to be sustainable. Then you find out, like, the ideal environment for all the citizens of the world to live in that thing that they said that they wanted, and we all agree that is what we wanted. The numbers come back like, okay, well, you can't have a car now, and you can't use airplanes anymore, and you can't use, like, packaging. You have to, like, I don't know, carry, like, jars around with you everywhere. And then just people are just like, I don't really care about the world anymore. I'd rather just live my life and fuck the next guy. Those people exist. So, or maybe they just, maybe they still agree with you, but, like, they're compelled to obey somebody, like a leader, who thinks that if he like joins the plan, that he'll get nuked and the whole world will explode anyway. So, a lot of the concerns I have about ideal money, the concept, would be impacted by that potential realization.
And of course, you mean this is the ideal in the sense of, like, we need to create the best money. It's kind of the situations people think Satoshi was in, like, okay, I've pretty much got the solution. Now let me work on the details. Should I trade fungibility for computational scalability, or so on and so forth? But it wouldn't speak to, there's a different thing where Bitcoin could serve to bring all of the major currencies into a single trend. And it's a lesser thing, but we might be able to use it to approach something that is good. This is what would be called asymptotically ideal money, or something that we approach over time. So you can't get to the ideal. That's an ideal. It's notion. It's conceptual, but it's a direction. And then you might be able to create something that moves us towards that. And that would be more something today. Whereas if you've got this, if you've decided what everyone has to do and what everyone can do, and that would be ideal, you're tending towards, like, the question of Marxism and communism, or how would you bring that about? What's the governance structure you'd have?
I mean, don't ask me. These people are generally, I don't think anybody knows what communism is. But that would be another, like, assuming that money is an ideal, might be, like, where the pretense is a little iffy. It might be that, like, what everyone agrees on is we don't need money. And, like, I believe that's stupid for reasons I don't really have to explain, but wouldn't surprise me is if you're trying to sell, like, a Model T Ford, will be, like, commercially what we need. Everybody instead wants to buy, like, like a flying UFO, which can never happen. And then you're stuck in this world where you have, like, this great idea, but there's no environment by which it can succeed. And the pretense of this particular idea, it's kind of like a catch-22, because you have a very toxic community who can't agree on anything. A lot of ways that are required to, like, sell an ideal. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know John Nash's theory well enough. My assumption is there's, like, a context of evaluation that I just don't get, in which everything makes sense. But, like, I think for my idea, I don't know that kind of environment is what we actually see. Where's the martyr in John Nash's Ideal Money? Because like it seems like that's a huge component of Bitcoin itself.
That's all great. So what another way of sort of what you're saying is like you're gonna have to, and when say we'll say Satoshi would have to introduce this with an element of like an assumption of greed and non-cooperation. Like you're not going to say like, okay, let's go to all our politicians or let's vote for like, let's bring about this great change and reform. It's going to have to be like, people are stupid and people are greedy. Let's introduce it such that that's our security premise, I think, is basically.
Yeah, that's for sure. So unfortunately, I think that what we've seen with that model is that you are incentivized to join Chainlink cases. As a result,
It's true.
Oh yeah,
but absolutely. But at a certain point, say for what I'm pointing at, an institution would say, "Wait a minute." Once Bitcoin say was in maybe the trillions, and they'll say, "Well, I can send like 100 million or billions of dollars way cheaper than I would do other ways, or I get a better finality or better security." Or it's censorship resistant versus like the United States. They can't sanction, say, Venezuela transferring to Russia. And that would be greed too. That would be self-interested nature. They're just using it so they can get by.
The problem that the institutions are going to have, they're not smart enough to realize this, fortunately, though they might be in some cases now. The problem they're going to have is that Bitcoin is effectively fiat. So they're going to have to bet, they're going to have to say, like, they're not going to be part of the Bitcoin delusion such that they think 79 protons are in the nucleus of the Bitcoin. They're going to say Bitcoin is a software project developed by these people. And in most ways, we can see that this is about the same kind of command and control structure as we see at the Federal Reserve, except that they don't know that, and they don't have a military. So that's fine. It doesn't make it like an advantage. It adds more risk.
I think by a fiat, what you mean is the people, especially the Bitcoiners, have decided this thing has value. They sort of decided how much value it has, and the value of it is, I guess, determined by that propriety.
Oh no, it is. I believe Bitcoin is fiat. All these cryptocurrencies are fiat.
Yes,
because you have a version number, and that indicates changes as impacted upon the protocol by men. And like if you wanted to add Lightning support to like gold, you wouldn't just like update the binary and then everybody to upgrade their gold, because that's not how that works. So I think that the value advantage that gold offered was that it was not able to be controlled by men. And I don't actually think that that's the best value, I have to say. But it seems to be the weird sort of contradictory proposal that Bitcoiners believe, is that Bitcoin somehow is both updated and not updated by man. It's the Heisenberg uncertainty. Depends how you ask them and what mood they're in, they'll tell you both answers.
And that really touches on things like, so I would say this protocol needs to be ossified, not evolved. And if there was a rationale to that, I don't know if I'm using the word the way you do, but if there's something that people could hold on to as to why we would want to do that, and obviously the maximalists aren't going that way. They want to evolve it towards the libertarian ideal.
100%, you hit the nail on the head. And this was why I proposed that there be a mission statement in the form of the institution.
Me too.
Banks use TCP/IP to route their payments and messages. So if we had emulated an institutional model, I think that's better than what we've done for this reason. But since we didn't do that, it's no longer so obviously the case to me that this is going to work that way, because now the banks are investing in like libertarian delusion as opposed to an institutional model.
And Eric Voskuil becomes relevant because he talks about how if Bitcoin was solely used by state, it would give them control over the protocol versus the citizenry. But where I say, well, state there's no world state. The states are in competition with each other, and that competition, I think, is sufficient such that changing the protocol against what the central banks would say or high value institutions would want is going to become harder over time.
100%. Like this stuff is, we don't have like an educated public anymore, and that at least like not in the sense of like civics, if not everything, but it makes it hard to do all kinds of stuff, which I think is kind of a good thing, honestly, net basis, because things were getting perverse and still are very perverse. But it makes it hard for all of us online, even like Wikipedia. I'm shocked that Wikipedia still exists. That I don't know how that's possible. Like all of my understanding of the universe is like challenged by the existence of Wikipedia, because there's no reason that should exist. And maybe we find out there's a big scandal there, and then it's like, oh, okay, so I was right. It shouldn't exist. The only reason it did was because like it was like an American army of like volunteers on the slide that were keeping that in check. But in a lot of ways, what we have is the Wikipedia issue.
Do you mean because it should have fragmented out of existence?
Yeah, well, there's value in telling the truth. There's so much value in telling the truth. So I understand that there are models of truth telling that have endured over the eons, but given the contention of the political environment, I'm surprised that we allow varying Wikipedia pages to survive in the way that they have, especially given the governance model of Wikipedia, which is I really don't understand it, but.
Well, the pages survive, but the content is a different story.
Yeah, but it's pretty good. Like it
depends on what you're looking up.
That might be. It totally is contentious stuff. They have some kind of mechanism.
What's
I think they're big enough.
I think not always necessarily high quality.
I think that's true. I think Wikipedia is big enough to where like big issues and like historical things are pretty much well fleshed out without any issues, but current event type things that are going on, very foggy, in my opinion.
Okay, so is there something better than Wikipedia?
No, not for what we're pointing at. It's quite remarkable.
Yes.
So then that being the case, that might be as good as we can do, and if it has warts that I'm not aware of.
But I think that's also true in real life, right? Like the farther away you are from any given event, most likely the better perspective you have on the event. So, for things that are happening right now, our news doesn't get them right. The best source for current events right now is probably Periscope, where you can, basically watch someone else's camera on their iPhone. So like with Wikipedia, current events are probably forgivable if they're, the problem with Wikipedia, I think, though, is that you have a certain ideology that has kind of taken over the editor arena, and they kind of take care of current events in a certain way. That's not all that honest, but I think that's, again, like everything in the computing is going to happen like that happened in real life. So like I think that's an acceptable mirror of like real life and the internet.
Relevant to Bitcoin. Like, I think we have then the libertarians or the maximalists, they're trying to take it one way as fast as they can. And of course, they are admittedly against, say, the central banks. But I think like they're only going to get so far before it's snapped back to reality. And I think that's why we see this attitude from them, and they come up with things like shitcoin, and because their argument, it's not holistic. It's not observing reality.
Yeah. Also a measure of the demographic too that we're dealing with.
The early demographic, right? And if this thing goes into the trillions and it becomes cheaper to move and important to use it compared to the alternatives, then the protocol starts to be developed towards those economic actors.
Yes. That's kind of already been the case in Bitcoin. We see an effect on decisions by people, and we see money flowing into their pockets as a matter of just official relationship, be it Blockstream or MIT or whatever. There's nothing necessarily bad about that on a balanced basis, but I don't know that it is a balanced basis. I think that there's very little accountability and just a demonstration of perhaps ill will at times. You know, I look at like Samson Moe. That guy does not strike me as being a particularly congenial actor in the system. And he's not a dev, but he clearly has influence. And he has it because he's easily disgusted. Like that's the thing I keep coming back to. A lot of the people that are influential in the space are influential because they're disgusted easily. It's a weird protocol ratification mechanism.
Well, because I think I use the term core beliefs, which is sort of coincidental to like the idea of Bitcoin Core. But I think when, you know, our core beliefs are challenged, we fight or flight. And I think that someone like Mao and people like that, they share those similar beliefs, and they have to, you know, be like that in order to be in that in group, which is trying to steer Bitcoin in a certain direction that's not really perfectly rational.
I agree with everything you just said, but I would suggest that a lot of these guys are lying through their teeth because they'll promote ICOs or their own things on the side while simultaneously presenting disgust of the people who do that same activity. So I agree with you on the matter that people's core beliefs lend them to an environment where these presentations are effective. I would suggest that it's perverse because they're not true, as evidenced by the actions of the principals. They're just presentations. It's just acting. So they act disgusted, and in acting disgusted, they create consensus. You know that they aren't disgusted, and the community never holds them to account when they catch them doing the things that they're supposedly disgusted by. Seems.
And the consensus has dualistic nature implied, where they're in conflict with those who are not in consensus.
Yes.
That there's a basis there, like the conflict is part of it. They can't get along. It's not all inclusive. Bitcoin, the money for everyone, but if you don't like it, get the fuck out, right?
Yeah. That's the aesthetic. And I even kind of like that aesthetic. I get it. It's not a bad one. It's just that you can't dial it up to 11 while simultaneously ignoring very, very basic evidence that it contrasts with the ethic. You know, things like no leaders, things like ICO and shitcoin projects that are better, that are okay because the leader does it. It becomes very it's very disappointing for me to watch because I thought there was a little bit more independence in the space and dignity, and I'm stupid for that, and I get that, but they threw it all out the window when it was convenient and when we could make a buck.
Is it better if they're absolutely upfront about doing these things in addition to championing Bitcoin?
This is like an international question. I wish I had an easy answer. I would say yes, but all the evidence suggests that's not what people want. And you can see this time and time again. I don't want to bring in any more specific political party allegations, other than members of both sides of the politics are caught dipping into varying forms of malfeasance in their advocacy and in their actions. Right. And the population loves them, not because of independent of that, because what they want are these actors that they like. So we did the same thing in Bitcoin. In Bitcoin, the actor we liked was the easily disgusted man who was a snob, and it didn't matter who he was, because what we were voting on was the performance. We see that, I would suggest, even in the presidential elections, where you have the blue man, who I guess Joe Biden. He's depends on how. There's a few different. I don't really understand that platform, to be clear. So forgive me if I'm characterizing it poorly, but what I see is Joe Biden is woke. He performs submission for the woman, and he is a congenial person because he knows his place or some such thing. And the orange man, he displays contempt for the elites, he is like sort of this oddly honest person. And I know that like everyone might be groaning about, but like he's honest in the sense that he'll tell you that the system is crooked, and there's a deep state and there's a swamp. And like, yeah, he may be part of it, but he at least presented the act in a way we wanted to see. That contradiction is the same thing I see here in Bitcoin. Is, you know, we have these snobs who will not tolerate any form of bit structure other than the Bitcoin core structure, but then they go ahead and they have, you know, their own little shitcoin speculative nonsense things. And so it's like we're so easily captivated by who's performing like the ideal performance that we are completely just like detached from non-performative aspects of their being.
Well, it's starting to get late. We've been going for a little while, and I feel like maybe this is a good point to offer up final thoughts. If you haven't gone over to shawwars.com, make sure you get over there and vote for these guys. You can vote as many times as you want. You can push the lightning button a number of times, and it will batch all of your clicks and send them through to be mined on shawwars.com. Chris, you're still in the lead as it is right now, but do you have any wrap-up thoughts you want to offer people? Jousting for you, obviously.
You know what? Like I think people think I'm like a pessimist, and I understand why. But in my model of the world, you got to like acknowledge the problems so that you can fix them. And we've created this environment where only competence is what's acceptable, and that makes us fragile. And I think most of Bitcoin's problems and cryptocurrency problems are international issues at this point. And I think we should even get credit for spotting these things before the general population. However, what that's going to mean, too, is that if we want to eclipse the general population in our prosperity and power, we're going to need to look at the problems and solve them before they do. So if you guys think that, let me know, because that seems reasonable. But we like the sort of groundswell has to come from like the everyman. You won't see the talking heads, you know, co-opt this message is my suspicion.
Partyline chat is an everyman forum, you know. So
hey, you guys did great today. I love talking to you guys.
Good to have you back.
Ditto.
Jal.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys being here and really appreciate having a chance to chat with DeRose. And I encourage us to consider Bitcoin not as an ideal money, but perhaps as an ideal basis for the existing major currencies. And I think if we open up that conversation a lot, some interesting things can come out of it. And I also encourage us to, like this space, to start asking questions more than making statements based on axioms. And I think that's something that Chris does really well. And I think people should consider some of the questions that he's been pointing out. Yeah. So thanks a lot.
Buy Chainlink.
Buy Chainlink, right? Yeah. Anybody else hanging out still here today?
I gotta go. Yeah. It's a good time for me to go.
Hey,
so,
no problem.
thanks, Jal. You're the best, Jal. I don't always make time for you, but it's not because I don't want to.
Cheers, man. Take care. Thanks a lot again.
Everybody.
Have a good one, guys.